What I'm going to do in today's session is start with a very quick overview of what we covered last time. So make sure everyone's got that context to start with, and then really go and focus in on actually how we start building a project in Looker from scratch. So last time's session was the kind of high level. We were introducing Looker. We were talking about its value propositions, its position compared to competitors, all the things like that. Whereas today it's going to be much more focused on when you first get your hands on Looker, how can you actually start? How can you go from having data sat in your database through to creating your very first dashboards? So that's the kind of good stuff that we'll be going through on the webinar today, but just a couple of slides as a reminder before we get going. So the first slide we probably would have talked about last time is this one, which is both providing a short history of business intelligence and also defining Looker's core competitive differentiations. And really, I talked about how the first wave of tools were pretty straightforward in what they were trying to do, didn't have very good self-service, but did have kind of pretty good governance because all of the data, all of the reports were managed centrally. Then in the second wave, the power went into the hands of the business user. So really making it as easy as possible to create your own dashboards, upload your own data sets, all of that. But actually, that often comes at the expense of this centralized governance. So there's no single source of the truth. Everyone's turning up to the meeting with different answers to the same question. So fundamentally, the kind of core philosophy of Looker is that actually, to get true value from your data, you need to combine the idea of centralized governance with the concept of pure self-service. So allow everyone to have access to that data, allow everyone to self-serve, but make sure you still have that one source of the truth. So everyone's getting to consistent, accurate answers. So we would have talked about that. We also would have talked about the live database connection, how pretty much every single tool in waves 1 and 2 was architectured based on the fact that you would extract data into their memory. Looker's a more modern tool. It's in the age of BigQuery, the age of Redshift, Snowflake, really, really powerful data sets. And so from day one, Looker's architected so that it's not going to store your data. The data's going to remain in the database. Looker's purely going to send SQL queries back to that database, return the results. And then the kind of last thing we would have talked about is about going beyond BI. So instead of just focusing on dashboards and reports, instead of even focusing on kind of self-service queries, actually thinking about the other ways in which it may be useful to use data across your business. So things like alerting, things like Looker powering data workflows, managing your digital advertising spend automatically via Looker, or building out embedded analytics solutions. So really how the kind of structure and having this governance layer then allows you much more scope with how you use that data than you would with just a traditional BI tool. So that's a real kind of whirlwind recap of the high level of what we covered last time. But now let's go into today's session. So we're going to start, from scratch. We're going to pretend we've, going into our Looker instance for the very first time. And we're going to talk you through step by step how we connect Looker to that database, how we start modeling out the business logic in LookML, and then how we start building dashboards. I'm not sure if there was a kind of question in there, so I'm just going to pause before I do jump in and see whether there's any questions so far. Perfect. So here we have our Looker instance, and hopefully you can all see my screen completely. And so the very first thing we need to do is connect Looker to our database. And that's going to live in this admin menu. So if I go to admin and I scroll down to database and hit connections, I'll have a list of all the connections that are already set up. Obviously, if this is a brand new Looker instance, that will be 0. And here is where you can add in a new connection. And if you add in a new connection, you will have to fill in all the parameters that Looker needs to know in order to connect to that database. I'm not going to go through each one of these in detail today, but there certainly is documentation which you can very easily find by Googling on exactly how to fill this out. But it's going to be things like, what is the name of your database? What is the SQL dialect? What is the account through which we can connect and query that database? And a few kind of additional advanced settings if you need them as well. So step 1, set up your connection to your database. As a reminder, Looker can connect to I think over 80 different SQL dialects. So whether it is BigQuery or Snowflake or SQL Server, MySQL, any of those, you should be good to go. And I think there might be someone who's unmuted. I think if you are, it may be a little bit of background noise. So yeah, thank you very much. So step 1, define your connection. Now, once this is all set up and ready to go, the next thing we need to do is create a LookML project. And so for that, I'm going to my develop menu and I'm going to click on manage LookML project and go for a new LookML project. But actually, Looker's going to say, not so fast. Before you're able to create this new project, you need to enter into development mode. And that's because, as we discussed last time out, the LookML section of Looker is all Git version controlled. And so what that means, is before I can actually start creating a new project and editing some code, I first need to open up my own personal branch. So I open up my own personal branch, create this new project, make my changes, and then when I'm ready, I set up the Git connection and publish this to production so everyone can see my work. So let's give this a name like Jonny training, something very imaginative. And then there's going to be a couple of different ways in which we can kind of kick off this project. The most common is going to be generate model from database schema. And what this means is Looker's going to take your data connection, look into your database, and translate the tables you have in there into LookML. So in other words, it's going to do some of the hard work for you by automating kind of some of the startup code. So let's take a look at that in practice. So I'm going to select this Snow Looker connection, and then I can either get Looker to translate all the tables in that database, or I can start with just a single one or a few of them. Here I'm going to start with just the single order items table, and I'm going to press create project. So what Looker will do here is go away and create a couple of different files for me. And I'm just going to simplify this one down. So on the left-hand side here, we now have 2 new files that Looker has created. So the first is a view file. And view files correspond pretty directly to tables in our underlying database. So I specified I wanted to start by just looking at our order items table. And so Looker has gone through, created this order items view, and translated each of the columns in this table to LookML. So let me really zoom in here. So for example, there's a column in the underlying table called ID. Looker's realized that's a number. Looker has realized that's the primary key. The next column is called created. It's a timestamp or a date column, and Looker's created a range of useful timeframes for us. So it's gone through and done that for every single column in that table. Now, the other type of file it's created is a model file. So a model file really controls how your business users are going to interact with that data. And at the moment, we just have one table, so it's pretty simple. We just have this one explore called order items. And if I now go to the explore menu and I find my Jonny training project, we'll see there's this one explore here. So that corresponds exactly to these 2 lines of code. So if I open up this explore now, we'll see that all of those fields from the table are now available for me on the left-hand side. So I can start running, pretty basic queries. Looker's actually even created this row count for us automatically as well. So for example, I can already run a query, which is the count of different order item statuses. So whether the order is complete, cancelled, returned, etc. And behind the scenes, we can look at the exact SQL that Looker is writing for this. And probably as you'd expect, at this stage, there's no surprises. We're selecting status, selecting count star from our order items table, grouping by status, and ordering by count ascending. So all kind of present and correct at the moment. You can imagine from here, we now want to start adding in extra fields, defining extra logic, so that when the business user gets their hands on this Explore, they have all the fields, all the data they need. So one example of this is this sale price column here. So at the moment, sale price isn't very user-friendly because it's a dimension. So it's something that can be grouped by, but it's not something that is summed, that is averaged, etc. So let's go back to our LookML and make that change. So I'm going to go to my order items view. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to find sale price here. And the first thing I'm going to do is hide this. And this means it's no longer going to be visible on the front end. And in a minute, I'll tell you exactly why I'm doing that. The next thing I'm going to do is create a measure called total sales. The type is going to be a sum. The SQL is going to be referencing sale price. So I want to sum up sale price. And then the last thing I'm going to do is format it nicely as US dollars. I'm then going to add one more measure. And hopefully you'll see as I'm writing in the LookML, how it's suggesting things I might want to put. So I start typing type, it knows that's probably what I want. I can then select that. The type in this case, I want average. I start typing average. It provides me that suggestion. Again, the SQL here is going to be sale price. And again, I'm going to format that nicely as US dollars. And not only is Looker kind of suggesting and kind of auto-completing what I might want, also you may have seen that on the right-hand side, this quick help is changing. So as soon as I write value format name, Looker's going to provide me a little bit of information about how to use that. Also, if I click on here, it will link me out to the documentation. And as a general rule, the Looker documentation is incredibly good. So for value format name, it's going to give me the definition. It's going to tell me all of those format names I can select. It's going to tell me additional things that I probably want to know, some potential common challenges. So a lot of really, really useful information for developers stored in that documentation. Cool. But for now, I've created these two measures. Let me save there and let me come back to my Explore. And if I refresh the page, what we'll see is that sale price dimension is now removed, it's hidden, but instead we have average sales and total sales as measures. And if I run this query and I look at the SQL, we'll see that what I've put in the LookML has translated into the SQL query, which is being sent by Looker. So that average sales is now this SQL statement here, and the total sales is this statement here. And at this point, what I should say is, if I take, my average sales statement here, what I could do is actually copy this direct SQL and put it in my definition here. So if I did this instead and use the type number, at the moment, that would lead to exactly the same SQL being generated. Those two things currently are completely equivalent. Obviously, using these types, using that average type has a benefit that I don't now need to know what this average syntax is. And that's particularly relevant if you're working across a few different dialects. If you've got, if you're using Snowflake for some of your data, you're using BigQuery for some of your other data, some of these syntaxes will be slightly different, but Looker's doing all that hard work for you. Looker's translating this into the right average syntax. So these Looker types are very, very helpful. But I could do this. I could now have this. And again, at the moment, that is going to give me exactly, the same SQL query. But actually, the crucial thing about LookML is that it's making SQL more scalable. And what I've written here actually isn't doing that, because now if I wanted to change the definition of sales, I would have to change the definition of total sales and average sales separately, because at the moment that's just pointing to the underlying column in the database. Whereas actually, if I do this instead, this measure is now pointing at this dimension. And so this dimension now becomes the central source of truth for the definition of sale price. So now if I wanted to change this definition, so adding a constant like here, if I save that change and again come back to my Explore here and look at the SQL, we'll see the definition of both of these measures has now changed. So really, the crucial takeaway here is instead of referencing columns in your underlying database, you want to be referencing LookML dimensions and LookML fields, because this is how you build out the scalability. This is how you get to central sources of the truth. Awesome. So in some ways, that's the most important takeaway from almost this whole session today. The power of LookML comes from its scalability, comes from its agility, and that really is as a result of using these references and building up LookML in this way. And you could imagine, we kind of keep going in a very similar way. And this really is the role of the LookML developer, to take your kind of basic data set and enrich it with all of the logic, all of the fields that the business users then going to need. So another kind of classic way of doing this is in adding in additional tables. So let's add in a further table from our database. I'm going to click on this plus button. I'm going to go for create view from table. Looker's then going to show me all of the views that live in my underlying database. Let me select the users one, press create view. Looker's going to do exactly what it did before, find the users table, translate each of the columns into LookML. So we have an ID column again, Looker's translated that into LookML, age column, city column, so on and so forth. However, at the moment, this data is not available to our end users. If I go to my Jonny training project down here, we still only have this one explore, order items. So in order to change that, there's a couple of things I can do. The first is I could create a new explore for that users table, allowing people to query data from that users table. But actually what's probably going to be more relevant in this case is if I join that table to our order items table. So let's join them together and allow people to query across them. So let me do join users. What type of join do I want? So exactly how you define the type of join in SQL. Which fields do I want to join together? And in this case, it's going to be order items dot user ID equals users dot ID. And then the last thing I'm going to define is the relationship. So how many rows in the order items table can correspond to how many rows in the users table. And this just ensures that when you're calculating averages and count distincts across these joins, Looker's going to do that correctly. So in this case, you can have one user making many orders, having many order items. So the relationship is going to be many to one. Cool. So if I save that and I come back here, we'll see that now, as well as my order items field, I also have my users fields. So let me add in, one of those fields. So let's do user country. If I run this query, we will now see average sales and total sales broken down by, UK and USA in this data set. And if I look at the SQL, and let me zoom in here so that's really clear, we can see that these tables are joining based on exactly the logic we've just specified. So we're doing order items left join users on order items.userid equals users.id. And so hopefully, you're really starting to see how everything you're defining in LookML is directly controlling the SQL query that Looker is going to generate and Looker is going to send back to that database. And so really, as you get more experienced, as you have more practice with LookML, you'll get more and more comfortable with how those two things interact, how what you put in LookML is going to translate into the SQL query and vice versa. If you have a SQL query and you're kind of, almost trying to replicate that through LookML, how you need to do that. Cool. So we've added in this table. Now let's do something, slightly more advanced. So we looked earlier at this status field. So let me bring that up again. So status and count. And maybe we're particularly interested in our returned orders. Maybe people do a lot of analysis on these returned orders. So let's go back to our order items view and create some specific fields. So I'm going to find status down here. So I'll status dimension. I'm now going to create another dimension, which is returned. So whether or not it is a returned order. This is going to be the looker type yes, no. And we'll see what that does in a second. I then have to specify the SQL of what yes is and what no is. So I want this to be yes when status equals returned. Cool. And then I'm going to create another couple. I'm going to create a measure, which is count of returns. And this type is going to be a count, but I'm going to filter so it only counts rows where is returned equals yes. And then the last thing I'm going to do, if I can spell correctly, is add another measure, which is percent of returns. So percent of returns, this type is going to be a number, which just allows me to do any kind of freeform calculation. And then the SQL I'm going to specify is count of returns divided by count. Cool. So I've created all those. Let's now go back here. Let's refresh and let's double check that I've made them correctly. And given this is a live demo, there's always the chance I haven't done. So let's add these in and see what happens. Dun, dun, dun. And yes, so we've actually got an error here. So back here, Looker can kind of check your LookML. So if I run the LookML validator, Looker will tell me all the LookML I've wrote is completely correct. But what it's not doing is looking at the specific SQL you're writing. And actually, it's only when you go into Explorer and try running this query that Looker will then say, actually, when we sent that SQL query back, the database said that is incorrect syntax. And so, for example, here it's giving us that error message, and what we see is it's this row. And what I now know is that actually for Snowflake, I don't need kind of double quote marks, I need single quote marks. So let me come back here. Let me now make that change, save, and refresh. And now we should see kind of beautifully working queries. Awesome. And so we see that our yes no column is returning yes for the returned items. Perfect. It's only counting those, and the percent not very helpful at the moment, but is looking like it's doing the right thing. If we look at the SQL now and we look specifically at that yes no type that we created, we'll see that it's translated that. Looker's translated the yes no type into a pretty simple case when statement. So case when status equals returned, then yes, else no. Again, what we could have done is taken this whole statement, copy and pasted it into our our SQL here. But this, using the yes no type, is much easier. It also means I don't need to know the full syntax for my dialect. Cool. One more example of a good type, just to call out, is, let me see if I can find it quickly. Dun, dun, dun. Let me go over here. If I scroll down here, we have user age tier. And apologies, let me make this bigger for you, using the tier type. And if I show to you what this does, here we have user, and I'm going to select age tier, and I'm going to select account. And we're literally bucketing our customers into their age group. And actually, to be able to do that, if you were writing the raw SQL, it's a quite painful case statement. You have to write this full case statement. If someone says, "Oh, actually, I want you to rebucket these slightly," that's a bit of a pain. Whereas with the tier dimension, I could very easily, change these around, add in another age really, really easily. So not only is kind of LookML meaning you can reuse your SQL, it's also giving you shortcuts for writing that SQL too. Cool. And so really, this is exactly the process you go through. You keep on adding dimensions, keep on adding measures. You can utilize as complex SQL as you want in there. So, this is kind of one we made earlier, fully built out LookML model. And what we'll see as I scroll down is some slightly more advanced SQL than what I've been using before. So, here's a full case statement. You can certainly do that. A timestamp difference statement, you could use cast and floors and all of those things as well. Anything that you can use in your underlying SQL database can be defined, within this SQL parameter. And so that even extends as far as, for a database like BigQuery, you can actually create BQML models and define those within your LookML. So real full flexibility to use that complete range of functionality. Cool. And sorry, again, I think that there might be someone who's unmuted. So if it is possible to stick yourself on mute, that would be fantastic. Cool. And so, now we've kind of got to the stage where we've got a reasonably well built out Explore. If we were to keep going, we could get something that looks like this one here, more tables joined in, more fields, some slightly more exciting fields in there as well. But for purposes of this demonstration, this is good enough for now. So really, once you have this Explore, the next step is going to be handing it over to the business users who can then start building out their dashboards. So let's show you exactly how that works. So what they're going to do is run a query and then save that query to the dashboard. So we've just created these nice, returned fields. So let's make use of those. And the very first thing I'm going to do is something very basic. Let's count all of the returns over history. And up to this point, we've really just been looking at this data tab. So we've just been getting back our results. Whereas now we're actually going to start looking at this visualization tab as well. So this is where you take that data and you visualize it in whatever way you want. This first one's not very exciting. It's just one number. So we're probably going to use the single value visualization. Looker's always going to kind of make a suggestion for what is probably the most suitable one, but you could always change it. I could display this as a column. I could, as a table. I could display it as the world's most boring, column or bar chart. But I think let's stick with single value viz for now. I can also, customize this. I could change the color. I could make this a nice blue. I could add titles. I could, compare it to something else, change the formatting. A range of different options there. For now, let's just keep it blue. And then what I'm going to do is use this this cog menu in the top right hand corner to save this to an existing dashboard. And actually, although it said to an existing dashboard, I'm going to slightly cheat there, and I'm going to create a new dashboard first. So let's call this return insights. But actually, sorry, before I do, let me stick this in my own personal folder. So, here are all the different folders that are available. I'm going to put this in my own personal one, so it's out of the way. Let me call this returns. I'm going to add in this this new dashboard. I'm then going to call this specific tile total returns and save it to the dashboard. So then I'll get this message, that's successfully been saved. I can go and look at my dashboard, and I now have what is, unofficially the world's most boring dashboard, just with my one tile here. So let's at least go back and add in, at least one more tile. So now I'm going to look at the count of returns by return month. So let me run that query here. Count of returns by month. I probably want to see this on something like a line chart. Again, I could play around with the settings, play around with the axes. Let's, for this demo, just keep it like that. And let's again save it back to my returns dashboard. And let's call this returns over time. Cool. And you can imagine, we could keep going. We could add in more tiles. They'd keep popping up on this dashboard here. I probably want to, edit this dashboard. I want to move these tiles around at the very least. So I'm going to click on this menu, click edit dashboard. Let's, resize this. Let's drag this over here. Let's make it bigger. I could customize this, title. I could also add in, I could either add in more visualizations directly from here. If I was to add visualization, I could then, choose my explore. So I could go back and find Jonny training order items and add in a tile this way. Or I could add in a text tile. So let's say this dashboard contains returns insights. Perfect. You'd probably want something a little bit more exciting in your text tile, but this can be used to help users navigate through the dashboard. You could even use HTML to contain links and things in there. So lots of options. Cool. Actually, we have a kind of a semi-interesting dashboard now. And imagine that a user comes in and is trying to interact with this. So one of the things they'll probably do is they'll look at this returns over time chart and they'll think, oh, there's a lot of returns on this date. I'd love to find out a little bit more about them. So if I click on this point, Look will allow me to kind of drill in by, by week, by day, by time, or it will allow me to show all of these returns. But actually at the moment, it's not showing me anything particularly useful. It's just showing me their order ID. But I can actually customize exactly what shows up here from the LookML. So LookML is going to, not just control the definition of your fields, but actually also controls how it is, displayed and how users interact with the data on the dashboard. So in this case, I'm going to find count of returns and measure. I'm going to add in drill fields. So I'm going to add in a few useful fields that I want to pop up. So let's go for users.email. Let's go for return. Let's go for total sales, and let's go for return date. Cool. So I've added in those drill fields to this measure. I've saved. If I now come back to my dashboard and refresh, this time when I click on the point and press show all 130, it's showing me some more useful information. So hopefully you can start to see how the LookML really is controlling that user experience for your business user. And going back to one we created earlier, let me open this up. Here we see a dashboard, which is fully built out, a range of different visualizations. We've got our text tiles in here to help us navigate through. We have filters specified up the top. And now, if I click into one of these visualizations, again, we're going to have, relevant fields popping up. But actually, we're going to have even more options. And, if you were there for the last session we did, this will be familiar to you. But for example, in this case, I can click on the email address of a customer and there's a few options for me. So one is I can link out to a separate dashboard, and another is that I can send an email directly to the customer from here. So here's the kind of message where I can customize that before sending it on. If I go to that tab I've just opened, we'll see the customer look up information for this specific customer, their number of orders, their user location. But crucially, all of this, the fact that these two options pop up is again controlled from the LookML. So in this case, if I go and find user email, have I already scrolled past it? Yes, I have. Apologies. Here we have the LookML dimension for email. Let's make this really nice and big. And what we'll see is we not only have a SQL definition inside this dimension, we also have this link parameter. And so that is directly controlling the fact that, when I click on here, this link to this dashboard is popping up. So, the link, it has a label, we specify what the icon is, and we specify where we should be taken to when we click that link. And then we have that action as well. So email promotion to customer, we're specifying, these parameters that come up. So, the subject line, the body of that message. Again, if I go back here, we'll see, subject pops up, body pops up. And again, we're specifying where this information will be sent to when we press send. So really, once we have fully built out LookML code, which contains all of this good stuff, it does get, I don't want to say complicated, but you can see how it's more built out, and there's a lot more things we can do than our kind of basic example that we've built so far. Cool. And so really, taking a step back now and thinking about that whole process, step one is connecting Looker to your database. So defining that connection. You can define many connections. Looker can connect to a whole range of different SQL databases. Once you have that connection, the next thing you need to do is create your project and define your LookML. And Looker's going to do some of the kind of hard work for us by automatically generating these files. But then it's our job as LookML developers to go through and enrich that content. So add in more dimensions, add in more measures, really create and explore which contains all of the fields that a business user is then going to need. And so this is a slightly different structure to some kind of traditional BI tools, where I'll go in here as a power user and I'll kind of be, expect to be able to start creating my own fields. I might have sales and cost. I want to go in and define margin myself and define, margin rate and all of those other things. But actually, the problem with that is if you have 5 different people all doing that and all doing slightly different definitions, you run into trouble. So really, you need to make sure upfront you've defined all of the fields that everybody is going to want. But crucially, you're defining them once and only once. So everyone who's using margin rate will have exactly the same definition, will get to consistent analysis. Cool. And so that does mean, Looker isn't a tool where you're delivering dashboards from minute one. We've seen in this demo, yes, I've created this demo, created this dashboard, within half an hour. But really, in practice, you are going to spend more time up front writing this LookML, getting those definitions correct. Obviously, there'll always be some iteration. You'll show this to the end users. They'll go, brilliant, but actually, I need this one extra field. Or great, but I want you to slightly change, these drill fields or add in a link or do any of that. And of course, you can do that. You can go back and edit your LookML. But really, the goal is to upfront define as much of that core business logic as you can. Wonderful. And again, hopefully, it's obvious and it's really apparent. But every time I now build a dashboard based on that data set, it's using exactly those same definitions. And so to be really explicit, now if someone comes to this dashboard and reloads the page, what's happening is each of these queries, each of these tiles is sending a SQL query back to Looker. And we can see exactly what query it's sending. If I go explore from here and I go across to my SQL tab, this is the SQL query that Looker is sending whenever someone comes in and refreshes this dashboard. And crucially, that definition of return count will be an identical definition no matter which dashboard you're looking at, no matter who is running that query, whether it's me, you, someone else in the business. So again, it all comes back to this idea of governance, this idea of a central source of the truth. Wonderful. So I think there's a couple of other things that I wanted to touch upon, but they're going to be slightly separate. So that's the kind of bulk of today's demo completed. So just going to pause there in case anyone's got any questions on what we have covered.
Seems
Wonderful.
like there's no questions.
Awesome. Either everyone is now a LookML expert or everyone has fallen asleep. So hopefully it's option one. But certainly, you know, as I said at the beginning, one of the fantastic things about developing in Looker is the documentation is very, very good. And also it is very intuitive. I know everyone always says that, you know, oh yes, you know, my coding language incredibly intuitive, but it really is, because at the end of the day, all LookML is SQL. It is just a way to take SQL, break it down into its blocks, and then reuse those blocks in a scalable, sustainable way. So if you know SQL, if you know how to define, you know, things in SQL, use a case when statement, then yes, you know, you can learn how to use these Looker types to make your life easier. But you know, if you wanted to, you don't even need to do that. All the LookML is just a few simple wrappers around the outside of your SQL definitions. And so really, if you're competent with SQL, we find people can get, you know, pick up the basics of LookML within a, you know, half an hour. Obviously, over time, you get better, you learn new things, but it is a very, very quick time to value in terms of learning this language. The other couple of things I wanted to mention is at the moment, everything I've done is just viewable to me. And that's because I am still in my development mode. I've never committed this code to production. And in order to do that, the first thing I'd need to do is configure Git. So if I press the configure Git button, pretty much it will ask me, what is the Git repository that I want to store this code in? So I paste in the repository URL, you know, there's a couple of extra screens to go through, but you know, within 20 seconds, I could be set up. And then, you know, I can leverage all the best features of Git. So I can push my code to production. Then if I want to make changes, I can come in, open up my own personal branch, change things, test it out, only recommit once, you know, it looks good and I'm comfortable with it. Someone else can come in, you know, they can view the production code, they can open up their own branch, exactly the same. We can see the history of the commits. You can very easily go back, reinstate an old version of the code, all of that flexibility. The other thing I wanted to quickly talk about is Looker blocks. So one of the other beauties of being code-based, so you know, LookML is very much code-based. It's not kind of GUI or kind of drag and drop in terms of how you're defining these data models. And one of the core benefits, which hopefully we've shown during this demonstration, is the added flexibility. But another benefit you get is the reusability. So if you've defined your LookML once, and then you have a very similar data set, someone else has got an identical data set, that code can be reused. And so the concept of Looker blocks is that there exist data sets which are very, very common. So one is Google Analytics data. So if you work with Google Marketing Platform and you work with Google Analytics 360, you can have the data for that exported directly into BigQuery or another database of your choice. And that data set is always going to have exactly the same structure. And the likelihood is you're going to want to ask pretty similar questions of the data. And what that means is you can have the same LookML code, copy and paste it into your instance, and it will do exactly what you want. It will take that underlying data set, deliver you the fields, deliver you the dashboards you need. That is what Looker blocks are. Blocks of LookML code designed for typical common data sets. You can just copy and paste them into your into your Looker instance, and you're ready to go with all the logic you need, all the dashboards you need. Obviously, you can then go back in, edit them, make them better, personalize them for your exact use case, but you have that starting point. Awesome. So that was an awful lot of me talking. Hopefully, a lot of that made sense. We tried to go through that pretty slowly, very much kind of step by step, of showing exactly the process of going from database through to dashboard. Just going to pause one last time in case there are any additional questions out there. Cool. Well, thank you very much for your time. Great to see you all on the call today. And I know that the recording of this will be uploaded to the website as well. So if either you want a refresher, or there's someone else at your company who you think it might be useful for them to see it, it will be there as a resource for you.
Guys, thank you very much for participating in this meetup. Jonny, as always, a pleasure to see you work. It was an incredible lecture. Would you be kind enough to talk about multi-environments of deployment, for example, dev, staging, production instances?
I certainly can. And so I suppose we talked there about how LookML is all Git version controlled. So when you're writing LookML code, you can open up your personal branch, test things out, and then deploy it to production. If you want a similar setup for your content, and by that I mean for your dashboards, for your reports, so if you want to have a staging version of your dashboard and then push it to a production version later on, you can do that by having multiple Looker instances. So you can have a full staging instance of Looker, a full deployment instance of Looker, and there's tools you can use to make kind of deploying between those two pretty quick and easy. So one Looker instance allows you version control of your LookML. If you have multiple Looker instances, you can do the same with your content. So if either you're particularly kind of large organization, or if you're using Looker to power a kind of end application, those are situations where we often see real benefit in having that multi-instance approach. So yeah, great question. Definitely something Looker offers, and if that's something you're interested in or want to know more about, happy to answer questions. Or again, and I'll sound like a broken record at this stage, there's really good documentation online about that as well.
Again, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to see you work. This was very good 2 sessions. I would like to thank you for taking the time to prepare this content for our community in Israel.
Wonderful. No, well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I hope you all have a fantastic end to 2021.